had, left me. And so I had to go back and say, well, is that true? Is that really true? That's the belief and that's the story that you've been telling yourself. But is it really true that he doesn't love you? Or is it really true that that means then you're not worthy of love? And so as I started to really get aware of the stories that I was telling myself.
Awekenge, this is Mental Mythos, hosted by Asagototo. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Mental Mythos. I'm your host, Asagototo, and before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
What was your background growing up, and how did you influence your own insecurity and behaviors in relationships?
Yeah, so I grew up in a very dysfunctional, chaotic environment. My father was an alcoholic, and my parents divorced when I was just 12. And so at the time, he was still drinking, and I told him, I don't want to have anything else to do with you as long as you're drinking. And he really took that to heart. And I didn't speak to him again until I was 25. And that was just briefly. And then we didn't speak again until just this last 3 years, which was the last 3 years of his life. So I always had that sense or that feeling of, well, gosh, if my own father doesn't love me, why would anyone else love me? And that carried through my relationship. So I was very insecure, and I always felt like my partner was going to leave me or cheat on me or do something, damaging to the relationship. So I always lived with this anxiety and this fear of the other shoe falling in my relationships. And so I became very insecure and jealous in my relationships.
In terms of in taking the decision of that you no longer want your dad be involved with you as long as he's drinking, was something that you took upon it by yourself, or did you have to hear advices from people on how to deal with such thing?
No, I mean, it was just at that point, my parents were going through their divorce, and my dad would say that he was going to pick up me and my little brother, on Saturdays, and then he wouldn't show up. And that would happen for a few weeks in a row. And I could just feel the, disappointment in myself, but also see it in my little brother, the disappointment of him not showing up and him not being there. And all the while, he was telling us that he was in AA and that he wasn't drinking, which may have been the case. And I know he was in AA for a while, but at that point, he had fallen off the wagon, so to speak. And when he finally did show up to pick up me and my little brother, he had a beer in his lap, driving. And so that's when I said, I don't want to do this. I don't want you in my life if you're going to be drinking, because it was so chaotic and violent growing up with it already. I felt like this was my time of escape from it, and it was sort of my choice if I wanted to be around it or not. At 12, I didn't really understand what I was saying. I just knew that I didn't want to be around it.
12, I believe that at 12 you took a bold decision, and a decision that you didn't I would assume that a decision that you I would say you wouldn't assume that it will motivate or help you that
Yeah.
go to be better, to a better man. And also, I want to talk about in terms of you mentioned that you feared that the environment that you grew up, it has affected your relationships. Hey,
Mhm.
how did you notice that your environment that you grew up in it affected your relationships in general and also your self-esteem?
Yeah, I think, growing up in that kind of environment, I already had sort of that anxious stomach all the time. I was always worried about, is my dad gonna, is my dad not gonna come home tonight? Or is he gonna come home? And if he does, what's that gonna look like? I could barely have people spend the night. I didn't really want to go spend the night other places because I didn't want to leave my mom and my brothers there. So I was always an anxious child and kind of feeling like, oh, something bad is always going to happen. Just looking out for what could possibly happen and running through worst case scenarios in your head. So, okay, if he does come home tonight, well, what if he comes home and he's drunk? Okay, well, I need to do everything that I can, make sure the house is clean, make sure, I'm not loud or doing anything wrong that might upset my dad if he is drunk that would cause my parents to fight. Not understanding that I didn't have anything to do with, that type of thing. But those are just the things you're trying to figure out. Like, how can I make everything okay? And what things can I control? So then that controlling piece and that fear, always living in fear, really carried through my relationships. And as I said, when I didn't then hear from my dad for all of that time, it was like, "Oh, he's choosing that over me, which must mean I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of his love, which means I'm not worthy of anyone's love." And so then that paranoia or that feeling of low self-worth carried into my relationships, and so I was always anxious in my relationships, always waiting for the shoe to fall, trying to figure out what was gonna go wrong, and a very controlling nature.
Mm, mm. Uh, I would like to believe also that the fact that I believe that also I would assume that I grew up in a dysfunctional family, whereas I was raised by a single mother and all having different stepfathers. So
Mm.
I feel like in a way at first I felt like that I wasn't worthy of love and I always seeked attention. Even if someone left me, my heart would torn into pieces and also wanted validation until
Mm.
I taught myself to no, man, you need to be a man in general. Just take care of yourself and try to love yourself. And I feel like in the conversation of loving yourself is something one of the things that we really lack as in general as men. Uh, in terms on your case, how did you end up loving yourself?
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry that you experienced that, and I can understand why you would look for validation and you would look for attention, right? Because that's the job of a parent for a child. And so if that part is missing, then of course you're going to try to seek it out somewhere else. And so I hate that you experienced that. And I'm glad that you learned how to love yourself and realize, okay, I don't need that validation anymore. I'm just perfectly fine as I am. And so that's what I had to figure out as well of, well, wait a second, let me go back, because the story that I'd been telling myself for many, many years was my dad doesn't love me. My dad, left me. And so I had to go back and say, well, is that true? Is that really true? That's the belief and that's the story that you've been telling yourself. But is it really true that he doesn't love you? Or is it really true that that means then you're not worthy of love? And so as I started to really get aware of the stories that I was telling myself and breaking those down to say, well, wait a second, that's not really true. He has a disease, he has a problem with alcohol, and his problem with alcohol and his inability to be a good parent at that time has nothing to do with my self worth and if I'm worthy of love or not. And so I think it's going back through, and I highly recommend people to go, what am I saying to myself all the time?
Mm,
What is the story that maybe I've been carrying around? Because a lot of times we don't go back and take inventory of some of those old beliefs that we established as children as a way to get through those hard times. And so we need to go back and kind of dump that out and go, what am I saying to myself? And is that true? Or do I still need that?
mm, mm, mm. Um, in terms of it's very fascinating, truly, that sometimes that don't find our own worth, and we end up in terms of we end up being into relationships, but find out that one person is enough for us. So I just want to get on to into the insecurity and jealousy. And so how did your own struggle with insecurity and jealousy eventually lead you to become a relationship confidence expert?
Sure. So, my husband and we're coming up on 15 years of being together. And for the first probably 8 or so, 6 or 8, were really, really tough because of my jealousy. So I would check his phone, check his email, text messages. A lot of times my clients will, they're looking their partner up on social media and seeing who's liked stuff of theirs or who, they've liked, looking up on location services. It got to a point in my relationship where we couldn't go to dinners or movies or gatherings and events because my jealousy would sneak in there. And so if we were at dinner, going to dinner, I would scan the room for any potential threats, meaning, anyone that I think he would have thought as attractive. And I
Mm,
would scan the room for those threats and know where all the potential threats were before we even put in our name with the hostess. I would already have done that. And if for some reason he looked that direction, at any point that could have triggered me to say, "Oh my gosh, I knew it. He's looking at her. He finds her attractive. He's thinking about her." And he could have just been looking for the restroom or looking at, the decoration in the restaurant, but it would trigger that and it would start arguments, of course, in our relationship. And that became, I became very toxic. Now, luckily, he stayed through it because he knew I was working on myself. And, to be honest, should he have left? Maybe. But he didn't, and I'm thankful for that. But that's part of the struggle. And so as I was able to find ways to overcome my jealousy, to turn it down, to be able to tame it some, I wanted to help other people who were experiencing it as well, because not many people talk about it.
definitely.
So I was giving a speech given a talk to a women's ACA group, so adult children of alcoholics. And I was just telling my experience growing up with an alcoholic father and how that affected my relationships. And I was talking about how I was really jealous in my relationships and the insecure things that I would do, like checking their phones or accusing them of infidelity. And when I was done speaking, all of these hands went up. And the women were like, "Thank you so much for talking about that because I thought I was the only person doing that. I thought I was the only one who felt that way, who was that jealous. And so thank you for talking about it." So I knew that I had to start the podcast. So that's how I got into it.
Um, it's very fascinating how you as a person that when you start to talk about the struggles that you've come across, and you find it surprising that people find it very helpful, and in a way it gives you joy, it gives you that sense of purpose. So and also in terms of on my side, in terms of podcast, when I started talking about mental health in general, depression, anxiety, people were starting to praise me on being open about my own mental health. So in terms of, I want to go back in terms of when you said that you were in a toxic state. How did your husband react to it in terms of, did he showed any signs of leaving you?
You know, he would get frustrated as anyone would when they're constantly being accused of things that they're not doing, when you're showing them through your actions that you don't trust them when they've done nothing to break that trust or to be untrustworthy. And so, I think it was a lot of him trying to be empathetic and trying to understand, but then also being human and getting frustrated with having to have these arguments or having to be accused of things all the time. And so it was kind of this back and forth as we both tried to navigate how to get through it. Um, so it was difficult. And when it became, where I knew, okay, yes, he's frustrated and yes, he's upset about it, but I more than anyone would give anything to not feel this way, to not be this way as well. So when it became where he started changing his own personality and the way his own behavior. So, for example, he started to feel like, gosh, I can't even look around the room. I've got to walk with my head down.
Mm,
That's
mm,
when I knew I'm very toxic to this relationship and I've got to make some changes. And so that's when I really started to dig in and get self aware and start thinking about, the beliefs that I've been telling myself and why am I jealous? Because I say all the time, jealousy is not the problem. Jealousy is a solution. It is not the problem. So it's there to say, hey, this is showing up because there's something not quite right. There's something going on that you need to look at, that you need to address. And so for me, the jealousy was coming out as a symptom of me not loving myself, me not feeling confident, me not feeling like I was worthy of the love. So I had to change that and get to the root of it.
mm. Uh, you say that jealousy is the solution. How is that? Can you please unpack for us? How is jealousy a solution?
Yeah. So jealousy is going to show up to say, hey, something is not quite right here. And so in my case, jealousy was there going, hey, you're feeling this way. You're feeling insecure. You're not feeling confident in this relationship. Why? You need to start asking why. Because the question is not about, is your partner going to cheat on you? We don't know that. No one knows. No one can predict the future, right? So we don't know if that's going to happen. We don't know if you're going to stay with your partner long term. The real question is, the jealousy is there to say, but why is it such a focus for you? Like, why is this something that you are really struggling with?
Mm,
And so that solution came up for me of going, oh, it's trying to say, hey, there are stories back there that you're telling yourself that are not true. there are things that you are telling yourself that are untruths. And you need to love yourself. You need to know that you're worthy no matter how you were raised, no matter how you grew up, and no matter what this relationship turns into, you're strong enough to handle it.
Mm. How have you inspired and helped your clients to overcome insecurity, jealousy, and improve relationships confidence?
How has it affected other people? Is that what you're asking?
How have you inspired and helped your clients to overcome
Mm,
insecurity, jealousy, and
yeah.
improve relationship confidence?
Yeah. So, one of the first things, and I think self awareness is the biggest key to things. So, if you can get really aware of the things you're doing, um, that's a great place to start. So, I always say, you can't change what's in your way unless you acknowledge what you think, do, and say. And so that's sort of an exercise where we start because not everybody is really attuned to the things they might be saying to their partner. We kind of make some maybe off the cuff comments to them, or we're constantly asking them questions, not because we're interested in knowing how their day was, but we're kind of trying to connect the dots. So it's really digging into let's look at the things that you're doing, these insecure habits that you're now in, because it's just this big habit loop. So for someone who is jealous or who doesn't have that feeling of self worth, they kind of get that itch of like, well, I'm worried. I need some reassurance from my partner. So then they go seeking that reassurance from their partner, and maybe their partner gives it to them. So that might look something like, um, you know, you have a new coworker at your job. Well, you may start to question, are they attractive? Do you think they're attractive? And so what you're looking for is your partner to reassure you. No, I don't think they're attractive. But the problem is we don't always believe their answer and it's never good enough. Like we're going to keep seeking for more information. We're going to keep seeking signs of infidelity. And the thing is, if you have a partner who is doing what you want and what you hope, and they are faithful to you at that time, you're going to keep searching because nothing's ever going to show up. And so if we can't prove fidelity, nothing's going to pop up on their email that says I'm being faithful. So when we get in this loop of I need the reassurance or I need to go look at their phone or I need to ask them the question, we might get that for a little bit. And then all of a sudden, now we need it again. And so we're back in the loop of, oh, now I'm starting to feel anxious again. I'm starting to worry again. Time to go look at their phone, time to question them. And then this whole reassurance loop happens again. So we have to get aware of those things that we're doing, the things that we're saying to our partner, and certainly the things that we're thinking and the stories that we're telling ourselves so that we can break some of those habits. So that's just one place to start.
Mm. I love the fact that you say that you say that you won't find a message that's on his email saying that I am being faithful. I believe I had an interview with a neuro encoder where she said that the brain the brain believes what you tell it to believe. It's like
Right.
it's like looking for some it's like looking for trouble in terms of looking for some you deeply want to be right in some point that you start choosing people you are choosing your partners and not being able to trust. I feel like one of the things that we lack in relationship is trust, and sometimes it's hard for some people to earn that trust.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that is it, right? Your brain is going to, if you think something is happening, I'm going to see signs all over the place, just like when I was talking about me and my husband in the restaurant. of course I'm going to think he's looking at the person I identify because that's what I'm trying to prove, right? But if I was
Definitely.
trying to prove, yeah, that he loves art, I would see it as, oh, he must be looking at the decor. So it just is, yes, if I'm searching for something and that's why again it's not the greatest habit to get into of looking at your partner's private information because I can question, well, why did they say it like that? Or why did they put that emoji? Or, what did that mean? I only have part of the context too. So then your brain's really going to take that and make up whatever story it wants to make up, which could be right or wrong.
um, I'm seeing the time, and I think we're running out of time. I wish we had more time to engage more in terms of this conversation. Um, before we close off, do you have anything to share with the audience?
Yeah, I would just say to really, if you're feeling jealous and you're feeling insecure, understand that you're not alone. You're not the only person that is feeling that way. And the more you can talk about it or seek, support that can help you with that and talk through it, that's how you're going to start to make some change. Because most of the time when we're feeling this way and we're behaving this way, we don't want to talk about it. We're embarrassed. We're ashamed to say to anyone, "This is the stuff I'm doing," um, because not everybody's gonna understand it. And so, I just encourage people to know that you're not alone and to seek that support to help you through and get with people who also are experiencing those types of things so that, so that you can start to heal.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, and I feel like we both, in terms of this conversation, we were both into this conversation because I believe the fact that we shared some sentiments in terms of what when it comes to relationships and also mental health and in general what revolves around relationships and how our childhood have in a way affected us when it comes to relationship. So I appreciated the conversation, and definitely I enjoyed it.
Free audio post production by alphonic.com.